Hello everyone! Over the next few weeks I'll be taking a break from solo movie reviews. Next Saturday I'll be sharing what else I saw in September, and then the rest of October will feature mini reviews of spooky movies, as has become a tradition here. But before we do all of that, let's get this out of the way. Here are my thoughts on the books that I have read since the last one of these updates. Number 1, Random Harvest by James Hilton. A wealthy businessman and political figure struggles to come to terms with a gap in his memory from years ago. This is the novel on which the wonderful 1942 Ronald Colman and Greer Garson film was based, and in some ways it's quite similar, and in other ways it's quite different. The film rearranged the sequence of events, making the story chronological, whereas the novel jumps back and forth as Charles recounts the story to his narrator, who is his secretary, who's only introduced at the end of the film, played by Bramwell Fletcher. The book is as much a reflection of a cultural era, post-World War I, the time between the wars, anxiety on the eve of World War II, as it is a personal fiction. And because of that, there's a vein of cynicism and disturbance running throughout, which is separate from Charles's restlessness and incomplete sense of identity. There's one other major difference between the book and the movie, and that's the timing of a certain reveal. People had told me about this beforehand, I think when I reviewed the movie a few years ago, so it was not a surprise. Honestly, I don't know how I feel about the reveal being done this way, and I don't know that I can fairly compare them. The way I see it, one version isn't superior to the other. The varied approaches are merely reflective of the difference in focus. The book is, I'll say, less dramatic, revolving around the hero as he tries to solve his mystery. The film amplifies the female lead and shows her perspective, her anguish and loss, emphasizing emotion. They both use irony, it's just executed differently. And a few people had told me that if I love the movie, which I do, it's a favorite movie of mine, I should read the book because it's even better. Well, that's not my takeaway, and I knew going into it that it wouldn't be like that. I love the movie for a variety of reasons. The story itself is only one of them. While the book is good, I still prefer the film in just about every way. And I feel like it was always going to turn out like this. I appreciate the book, but they're very different. The film is more emotive. It's got a sense of timelessness, while the book is kind of more dry and very much a snapshot of an era. You could also say the movie's very Hollywood, even though the actors are British, and the book is very English. Number 2, Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur C. Clarke. A huge cylindrical vessel is detected traveling through space at great speed toward the sun. A ship is sent to intercept and, if possible, make contact with whoever or whatever is inside. This is a book my brother used to own years ago, and when I first got my copy from the library, I was like, ugh. I liked his edition, his 90s hardcover edition, much better than this trippy one. But then a few chapters in, I realized it's actually a clever interpretation of what's described here. I had read a blurb about this a few years ago, and it sold me on it. It made it sound like an ominous first contact story. I didn't consider the fact that Clarke didn't really write the kind of science fiction I was imagining. So when I first started reading this, I was surprised to discover that Rendezvous with Rama is actually an exploration adventure set in space. But once I recalibrated my expectations, I quite enjoyed it. It often did not go in the direction I anticipated, and that was cool, and it was original, even while it made references to things like the opening of a pharaoh's tomb or the travels of Captain Cook. It does have a lot of description, and you need to understand some concepts of physics, mechanics, and geography in order to grasp some of these descriptions. I am not good with physics, so there were some passages where I struggled to picture what Clarke meant, and I felt like, I don't know, I might not be smart enough for this one, but I think I did okay in the end. Number 3 is The Piano Bird by Lucille Kallen. I think it's Kallen. Maybe it's Kallen. This is a murder mystery from the 1980s, and it's the 4th book in the C.B. Greenfield series, which I had never heard of before. It's got a cool cover, though. A woman who works for a small Manhattan newspaper is staying on Sanibel Island to help her mom recover from a back injury. She gets involved in the drama unfolding within a theatrical group there, developing a musical, and when this drama leads to murder, she gets her cranky boss to come down and help find the killer. On the one hand, this was very witty. It's got some great descriptions, humorous interactions, and colorful characters. I liked all of that. But in the last few chapters, it's like the author didn't even care about the mystery anymore. She solved it to a point, but she couldn't come up with an exciting way for them to apprehend the killer or to explain the motive, so it gets wrapped up in a sloppy way somewhere else. It was lame. Also, funny as it could be, the 2 main characters are pretentious upper-class city folk. They're snobbish, they make political side comments, they have disdain for anyone with pedestrian taste in classical music, and they sneer about the rise of special effects in movies these days being the 80s. There's also this wannabe Britishness. Whenever the main character wants to be emphatic or feisty, she says bloody as an adjective. And for the longest time, I thought that she was British. I thought I was reading a British mystery, but no, not British, just a poser. And that got annoying real fast. Number 4 is Night at the Vulcan by Ngaio Marsh. This is from the Roderick Alleyn murder mystery series. This is actually number 16 in the series. I've read a lot of these. I own a lot of these. In this one, the premiere of a new play ends with a suicide backstage. Or was it murder? Ngaio Marsh, or Ngaio Marsh, I was told that you could say either, and that was a long time ago. If I'm saying it the wrong way, then I've been saying it wrong for 2/3 of my life. Nobody's ever corrected me. She's one of my favorite murder mystery writers. She's of the golden age. As in every Marsh novel I've read, the characters are interesting, there are good twists. This one has a nice long build up to the death, so for a while, the mystery was who was going to die. Unfortunately, spoiler alert, this one is marred by a squicky relationship. It's not the age gap that bothers me so much as the fact that the 2 people are distantly related and bear a striking resemblance. Like, they look so much alike that people are startled by it, they comment on it, they wonder if this girl is his illegitimate daughter. What? And they end up together in the end? What? It was a good mystery, though, despite that. I don't know, if you want to read a Ngaio Marsh book, there are several others that are awesome. Don't start with this one, it'll give you the wrong idea. Also, it's weird that I read 2 books in a row that are about a murder within a theater troupe. It's not that strange with Ngaio Marsh books. She had an interest in theater. She wrote several books that revolve around a theatrical setting or had to do with old stage actresses. So that's not strange, but that I read someone else's book that had to do with that. Very weird. Anyway, number 5, Beware of Pity by Stefan Zweig. This is an Austrian classic published in 1939. Set in the days before World War I, a young lieutenant is invited to a party. He asks his host's daughter to dance, unaware the young woman cannot walk. Mortified by his mistake, he makes an effort to atone for his thoughtlessness, but this starts a chain of events that have tragic consequences. Here's how I learned about this one. YouTube recommended a trailer for a new movie. I cannot remember the name of this movie. I watched it. I thought it looked like a nice romance, a nice little costume drama. I noticed people in the comments, though, saying it seemed to be a lighter adaptation of a famous book. I'd never heard of this title before. They made me curious, so I checked the book out of the library, and yeah, it's not a romance at all. It's a heavy psychological study of moral obligation and obsession. There's one character who is naive and who can't stay resolved on one single course of action, and another who is physically and mentally warped. In the first half, I was put off by the bitter tone, the constant vilifying of pity, implying that an act of compassion or kindness toward someone who is suffering is only ever driven by selfish motives. I don't believe that's absolute. The second half, however, was where it got me, or I got it, because in the most painful way, I could identify with both parties. I've been infatuated and done things that in hindsight, years later, are, so embarrassing and honestly, I realize now, kind of stalkerish. And I've been the unwilling and, quite frankly, disgusted object of infatuation. And there were passages here that were agonizing to read because they struck disturbingly close to home. There were some paragraphs where I was like, oh my goodness, I know exactly what's being described here! But it was also frustrating because the main character, the guy, who's 25 years old, seems very young. He feels every possible emotion and keeps changing his mind. And also, he's so malleable and so prone to manipulation and drove me nuts. Plus, it was pretty obvious all along what would eventually happen. And it was something where I was like, I don't want this to happen, but I reached a point where I couldn't wait for the book to arrive at its inevitable conclusion, because I just wanted it to stop. It was good, though. I know I'm making it sound like, oh wow, this is terrible. No, it was good. Not just for the perceptive psychology that also led to some self-examination, but for its interesting picture of pre-war Austria, and I mean pre-World War I Austria, with its fierce loyalty to the emperor, highly disciplined military force, ethnic pride, and widespread anti-Semitism. And then when I learned it was published in 1939, of course, that adds a whole other layer to it. It is a translation, so I don't know how it compares to the original text, but the writing is kind of dense. It is challenging to get through at times, long paragraphs, not much dialogue, and the characters are hyperbolic, bordering on caricature. That said, though, there were some excellent passages that nailed the raw emotions. Number 6 is The Player by Stella Riley. This is the third book in the Rockliffe historical romance series. I've talked about the first two in other reading updates. An English nobleman exiled from home returns from Paris to claim his title and to get revenge on the scoundrel whose false accusations made him a social pariah. The major thing I've noticed with this series is that each one has more suggestive content than the last. And it's kind of shocking in this case Not the content itself, although I don't really go for bodice rippers and that kind of thing, and it's not on that level, but each one gets a little closer. But what's shocking about it is that the first book wasn't like that at all. The Parfait Night, which I loved, at least as far as I recall, was squeaky clean, aside from maybe a couple swears. That was one of the refreshing things about it. It was written years earlier. These later books have come out in the last 10 to 15 years, and I guess Riley's style has changed. As far as the story goes, I found it hard to get a grip on what the hero is really like. But I acknowledge that's a silly criticism because that's part of the conflict between him and the heroine. He plays so many parts, he's an actor, a player, that his true character lies buried beneath them and has to be unveiled. I just feel like maybe this aspect wasn't pulled off as effectively as it could have been. I never felt like I really knew the true man. I still liked the book, though. It wasn't as good as the first two, but it was still enjoyable. Number 7, Fierce Valor, the true story of Ronald Speirs and his band of brothers by Jared Frederick and Erik Dorr. It's a biography of Ronald Speirs. When I finally watched Band of Brothers, there were a lot of characters who stood out, but one of the most fascinating to me was Speirs, who was introduced with this air of mystery and danger. He was rumored to have shot one of his own men for drunken insubordination, and to have executed a whole group of German POWs on D-Day. The men are intimidated by him, and afraid of him, in awe of him. But then he has one of the best scenes, saving the day and stealing the show at Bastogne. If you are a fan of the miniseries, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And then you see more and more of him, and he shows tremendous bravery and competence in combat, but also he exhibits compassion and deep caring for his men and an intense sense of justice. And I was intrigued, and I wanted to know more. I should also mention, in full disclosure, the actor playing him, Matthew Settle, was hot. That did factor into it as well. But anyway, I was thrilled when I found out that, like many of the stars of Easy Company, there was a book about Speirs. I read it, looking for some kind of illumination or corroboration, and while I'm not sure I got satisfactory answers to all my questions, it was a really good read. Speirs himself was reluctant to participate in any interviews or reunions after his retirement from the military in the 60s. Like many veterans, he rarely opened up about his experiences, and when pressed, claimed to have forgotten a lot of what had happened. But I did get a decent picture of the man. His highlights and his controversies are thoroughly examined, with commentary from other soldiers and officers and historical experts. The biography is honest but fair, and they often give Speirs the benefit of the doubt. There were some parts that mirrored the show's and presumably author Stephen Ambrose's account exactly, and it was as if the authors just put the episode on and wrote down what they saw. But there are other places where the account differs, revealing the show's inaccuracies, some of them flagrant. I also found it fascinating to learn where Speirs' career took him later, and I wondered if my view of him would change as a result of reading this book, if I would feel more or less favorable. But there's no huge alteration. He's still a man of mystery in many ways, but I still believe he was a hero. The next couple by the same author I read in this 3-book omnibus. Before we get into this, I should explain that I had this book, this 3-novel omnibus, on one of my library lists for years, so long that I could no longer remember which of the 3 titles I was interested in. So when I finally ordered it from the library and I got it, I said, well, I'll just read all 3 of them. I did not end up doing that. I read the first one, and then I started the second. I think I've got the order right. I started the second. It didn't grab me. It was the kind of thing where it's like, well, I would watch a movie of this, but it's not necessarily the kind of thing I enjoy reading. So I passed on that and read the third one. Number 8, The Deadly Isles by Jack Vance. This one's got a pretty simple premise. A man tracks a murderer around the South Pacific. It's an okay book. The first half is better than the second, and despite being only 174 pages long, less if you don't count the blanks, it felt like there was some filler, but it was a decent mystery. Number 9, Bad Ronald by Jack Vance. This one... If I could nominate one book that I've read this year that I would like to scrub from my memory, is this one. Ronald Wilby, a heavy, spoiled 17-year-old weirdo and mama's boy, rapes and murders a 12-year-old girl. In his arrogance, he thinks he's covered his tracks, but he's wrong, and as the police are on their way, he begs his mother for help, and she concocts a plan to hide him within the house. She works like a dog to make enough money so they can skip town, but she ends up getting sick and then dying, leaving Ronald alone in his secret room. The house is cleared out, put on the market, and sold to a family with teenage girls. It was absolutely vile to be in this self-righteous, delusional, perverted pedophile creep's head. And I hated everything about him. And in many ways, I hated this book. And you might be thinking, Weaselberry, if you disliked it so much, why did you keep reading? Well, the thing is, I hated what I was reading, but it's actually a good book, in the sense it's a page-turner, it's an engrossing character study, it's an intense thriller, and it's an effective, troubling, cautionary tale. The end was kind of rushed, and I would have had things play out a little differently, I think. But it's well written overall. It just made me feel sick. And what makes it even more disturbing is how credible it is. Maybe not the idea of someone secretly living in your walls, eating up all your leftovers and desserts when you're not around, but the profile, the traits, the way a sick freak like this person thinks. It's disgusting. I know there's a movie. I am not going to watch it. I've had a couple people mention the movie in my comments. I'm not going to watch it. I'm not interested. It's probably not as outrageous as the book, although the book was surprisingly not explicit in its language. If it had been, yeah, I would have stopped reading. But I had more than my fill of this. It was after this I read Sense and Sensibility, which was a nice palate cleanser. And then I wanted to try something by Barbara Cartland. Barbara Cartland wrote 700 novels, many of them historical romances. And I was curious about her writing style. How does someone write who turns out 700 books? These next 2 are what I could get from my library. Number 10, Heaven in Hong Kong by Barbara Cartland. A British girl in Hong Kong taking care of her little brother after their parents' deaths needs a sponsor to get him into school. She turns to a rich British merchant who owed her father a debt. He agrees to help and falls in love with her. My gut reaction? Wow, this was not good. The very first thing I noticed was how simplistic the writing was. It's like it was written for a 3rd grader, and honestly, that might be insulting to some 3rd graders. The paragraphs are just 1 sentence each, and I found myself revising as I went along. It was only 148 pages, but if it had had proper paragraphing, it would probably be less than 100. 90, if you take out all the repetition. In addition to that, there's a lot of pidgin English spoken by the few Chinese characters. The hero has been with a lot of women, and there's a lot made about that, and I guess that's a common trait with Cartland's heroes, not something I'm a fan of. Everything the girl says to him is peppered with ellipses. The conflict includes a Jane Eyre ripoff and a huge misunderstanding. The romantic bits are too flowery and cliché, and I was just glad when the whole thing was over. Which it was, relatively quickly. I think I was done with it in 2 hours. In the interest of fairness, however, I still gave the other book a shot. Number 11, A Runaway Star by Barbara Cartland. A girl finds out her much older fiancé is having an affair with her stepmother. Fleeing, she seeks shelter with an old servant in the home of a recently returned lord with a sordid past. This was a little longer, had a little more meat on its bones, but still, the stylistic issues were there. And this time, oh my goodness, the last chapter was just them repeatedly declaring their love for each other, and it was so boring! This couple was better than the last one. They talked, they laughed, they teased each other, they argued, but the story lacks subtlety. Cartland spells everything out, and it's tedious. Again, if you take out the filler, the repetition, the fluff, and the excessive explanations, it might be half the length. I may read another of her books sometime later when I'm in the mood for a romance that's light and very fast and very... whatever you want to call this, not taxing on the brain at all. But having read a couple samples of her writing, I'm not too impressed. I am gonna watch A Hazard of Hearts, though. I had to stop there and wait to film the rest on a later day. Got to read another book in the meantime, and I also edited what I had filmed and realized I'd forgotten a book. Between the 2 Jack Vance novels, I read Chocky by John Wyndham. It's a fun little story in which a couple British parents struggle to keep up when their 11-year-old son acquires an opinionated imaginary friend called Chocky. I enjoyed this a lot, even more than the last 2 Wyndham books I read, the Chrysalids and The Trouble with Lichen, which I've talked about in previous videos. It's fairly simple, and I guessed what was going on long before it was confirmed, but I like that Wyndham kept the focus on these 2 bewildered parents as they're trying to relate. Because of this imaginary friend, a know-it-all who sounds pretty obnoxious, the family dynamic is thrown off, and inconveniences and quandaries arise. The writing is frequently amusing, but it's not without some heart, especially between father and son in sensitive moments. I do think the cover art on the paperback I got from the library is very ugly. I had it laying around and my mom was like, "That's really fascinating." And the name Chocky sounds silly, but the book itself was a good read. And it's short, too, only 154 pages, but it's 154 pages well spent. Number 13, Whalefall by Daniel Kraus. A young man is diving in search of his father's remains when he's swallowed alive by a sperm whale with just an hour of oxygen remaining in his tank. If you find massive things in the deep, dark ocean spooky, and you're claustrophobic, and blood and guts creep you out, this is an incredibly scary book. The level of description and detail is astonishing. The author did heavy research so that the anatomy and biology would be correct and the scenario would be as feasible as possible, and the result is something pretty gross. There were a couple times when I felt like I might throw up. As for the storytelling, it's pretty good, especially how it captures that sense of awe and terror. The chapters, alternating between the diver's present predicament and his memories of his destructive relationship with his dad, are very short, some of them just a line or 2, so things move quickly. What surprised me was how emotional it became. The diver is on a mission, and that mission gets tangled up in his desperate effort to escape the whale. Things do get kind of weird, with a mystical, pseudo-spiritual twist that's hard to explain out of context, and even in context. But in its way, it works, I guess. Readers who go into this expecting pure horror may be put off by this element. I certainly wasn't expecting it, and I wasn't expecting the story to be as moving as it was in a few spots. But I appreciated the additional depth, on top of the insane level of realistic detail. After this, I read Who Goes There by John W. Campbell. I already told you about that. Number 14, Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. This follows a girl born in 1910 who keeps dying and restarting her life. The book explores the paths she takes and the ripple effect caused by major and minor changes. Basically, it's Groundhog Day, but it's her whole life, with a World War I, World War II setting. I thought the first half was great. Original and smart, brilliantly revealing new details each time her life reboots. It's fascinating to see her have inklings as a child that there's something strange going on, and it's an interesting study on causality. The story has humorous moments, and then it abruptly takes a super dark turn, but even that, as horrific as it was really well done. And then the focus shifts to World War II, and you would probably assume that I'd be thrilled about this, but this is when I started to feel the author was trying too hard. One of the scenarios feels incredibly forced, and another goes on and on and on. The longer I read, the less invested I felt. I was compelled to press on because there are so many recurring names and incidents, and you have better luck identifying the clever discrepancies in the timeline if you just plow through the book. But the second half was such a drag that this was difficult to do. Comma splices, a pet peeve of mine, were also much more noticeable in the second half, and I just thought the ending was messy. And one other thing, I know this is trivial, and it would have been different if I had a paperback or I was reading it on the Kindle, but this hardcover was so heavy. It's like they used the heaviest materials they could, and it's completely needless. I have read much longer books that were not so heavy. I enjoy holding a physical book in my hands. That's one of the many things that I love about reading. This is one physical copy I did not enjoy holding. Number 15, A Stranger is Watching by Mary Higgins Clarke. A young man is about to be executed for the murder of a woman 2 years ago when her husband's young son and new girlfriend are abducted and held for ransom. I never thought I'd be into Mary Higgins Clarke. I remember seeing tons of her books at the drugstore all the time, on the shelf next to trashy-looking romance novels with Fabio on the cover, which was off-putting. I did try one when I was a kid, and I didn't like it. But in the last couple years, I've read 3 of her thrillers, and I've really liked all of them. I can definitely list the similarities among them, so yes, there's a formula, but if you like that formula, and you like the kinds of things that she writes about, that's not a problem. The perspective moves around from chapter to chapter, and one of the viewpoint characters is the antagonist, another creepy weirdo, not unlike Bad Ronald. And again, there are passages here that made my skin crawl. But it doesn't go as far, he's not as disgusting, and there are frequent breaks, so we don't have to be in his head all the time. It's not for too long. Clarke is very choosy about the information she feeds the reader and when, which helps intensify the suspense. Tension builds up so that the last part is a mad flurry of action, a race to beat the clock, and in this one, it's a literal clock. It did feel a bit contrived at a certain point. There were 1 or 2 things that I felt like, no, that That wouldn't happen. You're just doing that for drama. But overall, I really enjoyed the book. That's what I've been reading in the past few months. I hope those of you who tuned into this video enjoyed it. It turned out to be longer than I intended, so I appreciate you sticking with me. Not a lot of light and fun books discussed here, but hopefully the video itself was entertaining, and I'll be back next week to talk about what else I saw in September. Thanks for watching.